Hi, welcome to this episode of ComSpeak, the show on which you listen to insights from a top communications leader. We have with us Nitin Thakur, Director Brand and Communications at the Max Group, who will talk to us about his professional journey in the next few minutes. Welcome, Nitin. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Amith. It's always a pleasure to get any opportunity to have a conversation with you.
Really, we should talk
On
more.
camera or off camera.
Thanks, Nitin. So we'll start by asking Nitin about how his professional journey began. How did you get into public relations and corporate communications, Nitin? Tell us about the story that happened 22 years ago when you began.
Yeah, those were really tough times. The timing was very bad. I graduated from my B school in 1997, and this was bang in the middle of the NBFC crisis. And I happened to have majored in finance. There were hardly any finance jobs going. So you could just say I fell into the first sensible job that I could find. There were a lot of finance sales jobs which I didn't want to take in. So my first thing was in events management. It's a company called CS Direct, still exists. It's a fairly large name in corporate events.
Was it a campus placement or you looked for it on your own? How did that happen?
If I remember, it was campus. It was a campus placement. So I did about a year and a half of that. And very quickly I realized that the two things, rather, if I was to say. One, and I say that even now, that in India, to discipline our youngsters, we should either actually have 2 years of compulsory army training or actually 2 years of hardcore event management, because it was fairly intense, not sleeping for many nights, etc., and so on, because of client deadlines and events. But I did realize one thing, that I could gather some intellectual depth around communication very quickly, but experiential marketing or events was sort of the lowest down the value chain in an average brand's mind. So they would look to them more for execution rather than any thinking or ideas around marketing. So I was looking at next best thing, advertising and public relations, two obvious choices. Just got the first opportunity in a public relations firm first.
And then you joined Accord Public Relations.
Yes, yes.
So tell us about that job. How did that take off? What did you do there? And then what happened next?
So actually, I'm eternally grateful to this gentleman called Nikhil Bhojwani, who was a director at Perfect Relations and co-founded Accord PR, which was a subsidiary of Perfect Relations. Nikhil was a very dynamic guy, had lots of foresight. By the way, he divested Accord eventually and moved to US, worked for BCG for many years, and now runs his own strategic consulting firm there. He was a guy who was ahead of his time in almost everything. Thankfully, he bestowed faith in me. Nowadays, you see PR agencies actively looking from folks from other functional area, fields, specializations, etc. Not at that time. Very few would try and take that risk or experiment. Nikhil did, paid off really well. I think I paid him back well enough, because I think within 6 to 8 months of my joining, we were able to establish a technology practice there. And in small firms, you don't really have practice areas. And I was heading that. We got some good clients like Spice Telecom, which was doing fairly well there. There were 2 or 3 great .com companies of around that time. So I think tremendous learning, good platform for getting into public relations.
Right. And then you moved to the now famous Vaishnavi Corporate Communications as well, which has produced a lot of interesting talent across various companies today. Tell us about that. How did you get into Vaishnavi Corporate Communications? What happened there? How were the early years?
Yeah. So Vaishnavi was also a bit of a leap of faith. I was, I think, employee number 7 or 8 hired there. The company had a huge mandate, but it wasn't actually even fully formed. So I formally joined what was called Crown Mart International.
Crown Mart.
Yeah, and then in a few months, once the company was, formed legally, Vaishnavi and all, so most of us shifted there. But I think a lot of, within the communication field, Vaishnavi is a bit of an urban legend now. Unfortunately, the company is no more, but there are a lot of things said about it. Lot of rumors, some good, some bad. But truly, Vaishnavi was the first attempt of trying to do public relations in a strategic manner for a large conglomerate.
True. And then after Vaishnavi, you began with your first corporate communication stint. You moved to Microsoft. Tell us about that. How did this shift from a PR consulting role to a corporate communications role happen? What led to that?
So while Microsoft was a huge brand, I was actually in a bit of a dilemma, and probably as much Microsoft also, because my whole hiring process happened in two different fits and starts. It dragged on for around 7-8 months, and so on. I think what stands out for me at Microsoft, 2-3 things. First 2-3 months, I was doe-eyed. I just didn't know what hit me. It was a very sophisticated organization in most areas, including the communication function. There was a huge team at its headquarters at Redmond. There were intranets with lots and lots of knowledge and information to consume at a time where they were not that heard of. But Microsoft had its own product, SharePoint, right? So obviously it better had its own act in order. There were case studies engines, and very, very complex structure, organizational structures and so on. So I think I would say in the first couple of months I felt whether I'll actually just keep on just learning here, would be able to ever contribute. So I would say eventful time, about 3.5 years. One of the learnings that I do take away from there is a practical way of measuring the effectiveness and impact of communication.
And then after Microsoft, you've been now with one organization for almost 10 plus years. And these are long stints. There are very few I see today in corporate communications who spend more than a decade in their job. Many spend a decade, but close to that time, and then they change jobs. You've been there for long enough. Tell us about that job. How did you move from Microsoft to Max, and what have you done in the last decade that stands out for you at the Max Group?
So Max was a bit of a rebound. Typically, you don't hear of people leaving a Microsoft to join a Max, though I can say with pride today that I am in Max, and I started when the world was in the middle of the 2008 meltdown. And it was initially, it seems like I had come to the dark ages, coming from a technology firm to a firm where, because anyways the technology, I mean they were in healthcare and stuff, they were trying to probably solve some of the world's largest and more pressing problems. Technology wasn't really such a forefront of attention at that time. So there are a lot of adjustments culturally, organizationally, the way you look at things, etc. and so on.
So tell us about a couple of things you did at Max in the last decade, maybe more than a couple of things that stand out for you, or things that you feel that, wow, they were the cutting edge of communications, they were unique things you created, disrupted some way of doing public relations differently. Tell us about that.
The Max stint was different, or is different in a sense that when I came in, Max was a fairly reticent group. They were known, they were somewhat respected, but its consumer brands were known more than the group itself. And there was hardly any function of sorts. So I had to put everything together. So the first few years went in building that, reminding the organization of the power of, active reputation building, etc. and so on. So to my mind, I would say that I wouldn't call it cutting edge, but the most value accretive thing that I did was changing an organization's mindset towards looking at reputation management and corporate communication as distinct from product-led communication.
Is there any campaign that you've seen or admired outside of your current job, either in India or globally, that you said, wow, this is the PR campaign I wish I was part of? This is exactly the PR campaign I would have loved to work on. Is there that one campaign that you look up to or say, this is the one I would have loved to work on?
And if you're forcing me to, I'm just saying the two, which are my all-time favorite, are both from washing powder brands, by the way. One is from Ariel, Share the Load, and the other is from Surf Daag Achhe Hain. Now, don't ask me on why is this. Is it because I'm sharing the load at home or not? Maybe I am, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. But let's also come to the reason why, and especially Share the Load. They can't be, one, it's hugely socially relevant around gender equality, and it's an issue which is not, and this is a campaign which emerged out of India and then went to many other countries for the same brand. So one is the pride of India having done something which was taken up by other places, India having done something which is relevant almost in the whole world. The second aspect is that it's socially relevant again across the world, not just in India. And third, besides being socially relevant, because if you see cause-related advertising is becoming very popular now, but very few have this direct integration with the brand while giving a social message. So it is around sharing the load on doing household chores and cleaning of clothes, etc., and so on. And lastly, the simplicity of it, very beautifully executed. I think any idea that's loved is when most other guys are sitting there saying, "Oh gosh, it was so simple. Why didn't I think of it?"
Right. So we'll move away from the professional questions for a moment. We'll go back to your personal life and your early childhood. Tell us more about your growing up years, where you went to school, where you grew up in, what happened as a young kid, what things influenced you to get into a career that you are now in some form or the other. Tell us about that, Nitin.
So first, as to clarify, as I said earlier, I just fell into public relations.
fine.
It was a second choice. But yeah, if you talk about growing up years, um, fairly uneventful. Unfortunately, childhood was not as interesting as some of the others, but regular middle class government servant family, been born and brought up in Delhi. But yes, the parents gave all the right values all along. Um, I think where it starts to get interested. So, and I studied at Cambridge School. Um, where it starts getting interesting is when it comes to the stage of what do you want to do in your life, kind of a thing, right? And I had no clue. And I look at a lot of kids today, including my own child. They have a fair bit of idea of the likes, dislikes, etc., and so on. I just didn't. So I have tried my hand at my family's side business of trucking, so the transport large container trucks, etc. Had sat down and chatted with truckers, uh, been on one or two trips in a truck, etc., and so on. Another interesting aspect is um, after my B school, or I think towards the last 2-3 months, um, I ran a neighborhood paper. Maybe I thought I'll become a magnate by, eventually starting small and going big in publishing.
What do you do to unwind? How does Nitin Thakur take a break? What do you do to take time off from your hectic work life?
By not taking too much stress, even at work. Yeah, I try and do that. I try not bring work home, not the work-related stress home. I mean, there are always mails and calls that can happen at work. But I read a lot. I love to. It's more of an acquired taste because of the profession that I got into. But now I try and read up on various different areas, not just current affairs, politics, business, sports, but very varied. Anything interesting, and I'll read it. And thankfully now the devices make it much easier as well to access a lot of that stuff. I am big on web series watching. So you say I'm a web series buff. Um, I travel less than I vacation less than I would like to. Um, but yeah, I would guess these three things, and spending time with my family, play a bit of table tennis with my daughter who's a pro at it.
Well, nice. So you just said I don't get stressed at work or don't usually try to take stress home. How do you do that? What are the tips to deal with stressful jobs, stressful lives that many lead these days?
What I try and tell myself is 2 to 3 things I would say. One, this too shall pass. Two, the world is not going to come to an end. And third, I would say, yeah, I mean, just do your best and remember that each of today's problem you cherish as tomorrow's learnings, which made you a stronger, better person.
Let's talk about some of your bosses. You don't have to mention names if you don't want to, but you worked in 4 or 5 large organizations over the last 20 plus years. Tell us about one or two of your bosses that stood out for you, from whom you learned a lot, who inspired you, who did certain things that made you feel that, wow, I'm learning something very different from what I would have otherwise learned.
First boss which left a huge impression on me was Nikhil Bhojwani, but I have already talked about him earlier. So right now I'm going to talk about Analjit Singh, who's the founder of Max. And Fascinating man, but two things that stand out. Uh, One is uh, what I would call, and I will have to say this colloquially, tehzeeb, the Indian way of hospitality. Remember, a lot of us grew up on American pop culture, and then I shifted to Max after working 3 years in an American company. And Americans are great; they have a fairly free, outgoing work culture, etc., and so on. But somewhere along the line, I think a lot of us forget the greatness in some elements of being Indian as well. And he epitomizes, for instance, making a guest feel great when they are over. You know, small things like seeing a guest off, even if he's come to your office and he's going out. In American culture, you don't do that, for instance. You know, you probably go to the counter and pick up your own coffee, but here you would want to serve the other person, etc. And I think it's a beautiful thing. It strengthens relationships. It makes you feel good while doing that, etc., and so on. And that goes in as a learning both in a professional and a personal sphere. The other thing that I learned from his is again strength of relationship. Maybe a very cliched thing, but the art of decision or art of relationship building. I would call him the chief relationship manager of Max, and he does it effortlessly. It's not that he thinks about it and does it. So these two from Aniljeet Singh. And my current boss, Mohit Talwar, who's the vice chairman of Max Group, I learned how you can continue to focus on a single thing that you do well and still do great in life. Most of us think logically, as you grow higher up, your repertoire has to grow. You have to look at 50 different areas and try and do well, etc., and so on. And I've seen he's one guy who loves, mergers and acquisitions and transactions that he does, etc. And he's added immense value to the organization in the process of doing that, and he's continued to grow. So that's another way to go.
So what excites you to go to work every day? You've been there 11 years. What are the couple of things that excite you to go to work every day that can inspire a lot of people who say, hey, I'm done with my job in 3 years, I'm tired, I'm bored. What excites Nitin at the Max Group?
I keep excited because, and excited may not be the right word, but yeah, I feel energized continuously to go and work because my thoughts are valued. People around me respect them as I respect them. It's a very good employer, organization-wise. Its ethics and values are at the right place. And it allows you the leeway and the freedom, and it has the trust to let you do your thing. And a lot of time these things are risks. They are percentage chances with no guarantee of what will work out well. But they just let you do that.
Right. Thank you, Nitin. It was great chatting with you. Before we end, we'll do a quick rapid fire. We do this with all our guests. 7-8 questions that you have 10 seconds to answer each one. What's your most trusted brand?
I guess it'll have to be Google.
What's your, I know you have, all of us have favorite books, but what's your one favorite book of yours that stands out for you? You recommend highly to read to people?
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Okay. Who's been your favorite boss of all time for the last 20 years?
Aniljeet Singh.
Your favorite communicator in the world of corporate communications or PR consulting in India?
Yeah, I'm going to stick to India and I'm going to stick to my larger friends and acquaintance circle. I think it's Paroma Roy Chaudhary, who heads comms for SoftBank in this region.
What's your favorite holiday destination? The place you'd love to go to, I've gone before and I want to go back to again?
New Zealand.
Really? Have you been there?
I actually did my honeymoon there. I know this is a short format rapid fire, but I was a bit of an adventure buff when we, and my wife didn't know that at that time. So she said, you choose the destination and you plan the holiday, and I did. And it was more like an adventure trip, not your typical romantic honeymoon. And she's not too much of an adventurous type on her vacations.
Who's the one person who inspires you the most?
I would say my spouse. Let me earn some brownie points on screen. I said that.
Thanks. And lastly, how would one describe Nitin Thakur in 3 words? If there were 3 words to personify Nitin, what would those 3 words be according to Nitin himself?
Grounded, witty, clear-headed.
Thank you, Nitin. I'm sure I don't doubt that. I've known you for almost 10 years now. I remember meeting you in 2009 for the first time when you had just moved to the Max Group, and I have not doubted for a moment that you're clear-headed, grounded and witty. So that was Nitin Thakur, the Director of Brand and Communications at the Max Group, sharing with us in the most candid way his life's journey in the world of the professional communications world he's been part of for close to 22 years now. Thank you, and keep watching ComSpeak on Founder India. Have a great day.